glad to be back with you, Ranking Member Hyde-Smith, as we evaluate the 2024 budget request for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The committee is working aggressively to move forward under regular order. I look forward to getting a top-line agreement in the next month, allowing us to develop a balanced bipartisan bill that recognizes our country's serious housing challenges. Housing and homelessness are a top concern, not only in major cities, but also in rural areas, small towns, and most severely in tribal communities. At the same time, HUD faces serious budgetary challenges. HUD offsetting receipts are down $7 billion from last year and at an all-time low due to loan volume decreasing as a result of higher interest rates. And adding to the pressure, the renewal of HUD rental assistance requires an increase of nearly $3 billion just to preserve existing units given rising market rate rents. The subcommittee has a long tradition of bipartisan cooperation on housing issues, and the preservation of HUD rental and homeless assistance has always been the foundation of our bill. And we've made progress in key areas. The HUD VASH program, created by Chair Murray, has cut veterans' homelessness by nearly 55% since 2009, and there are enough vouchers available to effectively end veterans' homelessness. The Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, created by Vice Chair Collins, has reduced the number of homeless youth by 25% since 2017, saving countless kids from trafficking or worse. Former Chairman Leahy established a rapid rehousing program for survivors of domestic violence that has helped more than 50,000 people get out of harm and into stability. Senators Reid and Collins made great strides to strengthen protections against lead poisoning, improving the health of thousands of children. And a core focus of mine has been to increase funding to historic levels for tribal communities, where overcrowding is 3 times the national average and the poverty rate is double. But this progress will end if we enact the House majority proposal to return to 2022 funding levels. Secretary Fudge has outlined her concerns in a response to Vice Chair DeLauro. I encourage my colleagues to review a copy of the letter on the dais, and I will submit it for the record. Now is not the time to slash housing programs. We should be building more housing, building it faster, and getting more families into the housing that they can afford. Amid these challenges, the administration is proposing a number of initiatives to ease housing burdens. I'm especially pleased to see funding requests for the HOME program to build more affordable housing and the Yes in My Backyard Affordable Housing Production Incentive Program. This program acknowledges that the federal government alone cannot build its way out of our housing crisis and that the government at multiple levels is responsible for creating a housing shortage. We need to create incentives for state and local governments to legalize housing. To the extent that the federal government does support building, I similarly urge HUD to remove its own barriers to new housing by streamlining administrative procedures, improving coordination between federal programs, and reducing costs. My staff visited a new affordable housing development project in Colorado that used LIHTC and 4 different funding streams from HUD for gap financing. That project had to go through 5 different property inspections for each funding stream, 4 of which were from HUD itself. This is a huge waste of time and resources. I'm glad I see the Secretary jotting this down, and something we can solve. To help families afford housing, we need to ensure public housing authorities are able to use the Section 8 vouchers that they already have, and that's why I support the President's budget request to increase funding to administrative fees for PHAs so that they can pay for security deposits and holding fees that will get families into units faster. Finally, we should be doing more, not less, to combat homelessness. Last year, we provided HUD $75 million for new permanent supportive housing. I was also pleased to work with the Secretary and Ranking Member Hyde-Smith over the last few months to make a historic $484 million available for unsheltered and rural homelessness. We know the housing first approach works, but we can do more to connect housing and supportive services to get people off the streets and into stable housing. Secretary Fudge, thank you for appearing today. We look forward to discussing these and other issues that you are managing. I look forward to hearing your testimony, but first, Ranking Member Hyde-Smith, I turn to you for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Schatz, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being willing to serve and for stepping up. Thank you for being here today. Let me begin by thanking you for your visit to Mississippi. Following the deadly and disastrous tornadoes that hit us in March, we appreciate the assistance offered by HUD to help communities and families, because my state will recover from that for a while. We're still in a desperate need. And I'm pleased to be here this morning to discuss the Department of Housing and Urban Development's fiscal year 2024 budget request. And I want to say thank you to the Vice Chair for being here today as well. But HUD plays a central but not singular role in federal housing and community development policy. In some cases, its programs actively partner with or supplement the work of other federal agencies and state and local governments. HUD's programs also facilitate collaboration with both the private housing market and nonprofit service providers. These partnerships assist low-income working families, seniors, and people with disabilities, ranging from providing houses for those experiencing homelessness to enabling home ownership. They also support community and economic development activities in large urban areas, as well as the small towns of rural America. However, while these programs are important, they are not immune to the broader fiscal challenges that we face as a country. This year will require tough conversations around the national debt and the scale of federal spending. As a fiscal conservative, I welcome these conversations as we work to set a clear path for the future of this great nation. The budget gimmicks of the past are not a sustainable path forward, and they do not address the underlying issue of our ballooning national debt. As challenging as the broader fiscal issues are, the subcommittee is also starting from a particularly different position, difficult for this year. Federal Housing Authority Administration, FHA, and Ginnie Mae receipts offset the cost of our bill. The administration projects these offsetting receipts to be $4.9 billion lower this year than last year. However, this gap will likely increase even further once the Congressional Budget Office finishes scoring the budget request. A $5 to $7 billion shortfall would be bad enough, but this will also be on top of the continued increases in the cost of maintaining current rental assistance, because some costs were designated as emergency spending last year. This increase could be as much as $6 billion. Combined, the subcommittee faces the real prospect of a shortfall of a possibility of $13 billion just to maintain fiscal 2023 program levels. It's too early to know what our allocation will be or even what the fiscal year 2024 spending level will look like. However, it is clear we will need to make tough choices that numerous proposals in the President's budget requests may not be accommodated. Instead, it will be important to try to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the programs we fund within the constraints we have to operate. I look forward to working with Chairman Schatz and the rest of my colleagues in writing a fiscal responsible THUD bill that seeks to meet the needs of all Americans across the country. Secretary Fudge, once again, thank you for appearing before this committee today, and I truly appreciate your help in Mississippi. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Hyde-Smith. Are there members wishing to make an opening statement? If not, Secretary Fudge, please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you very much. Chairman Schatz and Ranking Member Hyde-Smith and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of President Biden's 2024 budget. The support of this subcommittee is critical to ensuring every American has a roof over their head and can live in communities that are strong and resilient. This administration believes that everyone deserves to live in a safe and affordable home. Whether you rent or own, having a good home in a neighborhood with opportunities sets the foundation for everything else in your life. Without a home, it is harder for a person to access good-paying jobs and decent schools. It drives up costs for families and adds to inflationary pressures. That doesn't just hurt hardworking people, it hurts communities. A lack of affordable housing hinders the job market and stifles economic growth. President Biden understands in order to build an economy that works for all, we must invest in housing to expand supply, lower cost, improve access to rental options and home ownership, and advance efforts to end homelessness. As the President often says, a budget is a value statement. The Biden-Harris administration values building and preserving affordable housing. We value rental affordability and housing fairness. And most of all, we value the people of this country, including the most vulnerable among us, and therefore we do not believe they should feel forced to sleep on the streets or under a park bench. The President's budget builds on the tremendous progress made over the last 2 years and demonstrates the Biden administration's unwavering commitment to protecting all Americans, whether they live in big cities, small towns, rural communities, or tribal nations. President Biden is requesting $73 billion to fund HUD's core programs and initiatives, and an additional $104 billion over the next decade to make the critical investments in affordable housing our country needs to address our housing affordability crisis. The President's budget represents a modest increase over 2023 enacted levels, one that is necessary to ensure millions of families and communities can maintain access to services they rely on, including many of our most vulnerable citizens. The 2024 budget provides $32 billion for housing choice vouchers, which can help an additional 180,000 low-income individuals and families find affordable housing. $3.7 billion to provide housing and services to individuals and families experiencing homelessness. $3.4 billion to give communities flexible resources they can use to create affordable housing, improve housing choice, and expand economic development. The President's budget includes $410 million in funding we need to remove and mitigate the threats posed by dangerous health hazards like lead, carbon monoxide, radon, and fire from homes. It invests $752 million to support improving energy efficiency and resilience in HUD-assisted and financed developments, and $90 million to support HUD's fair housing programs. The President's budget supports full authorization of the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program. I have traveled to communities across this country, in many of your home states, that have been devastated by disaster. Storms, wildfires, tornadoes are not getting any less severe. In fact, they are getting worse. The federal government must be able to quickly and effectively deploy resources. Full authorization of CDBG-DR will help us get there. Because the President values housing, his budget invests in building up HUD's internal staffing and IT capacity, not stripping it away. We cannot carry out our mission to end homelessness and protect affordable housing, something I know matters to everyone here, if we do not invest in the federal agency and the federal workers who are charged with doing that important work. The proposed budget for HUD funds programs that help the most vulnerable households in our country pay their rent, people with disabilities, low-income seniors, working single parents with children. Our programs touch every community, every town, every locality, but most of all, they help people. They help American families, families from all walks of life, with all manner of experiences, who want what we all deserve, access to a safe and stable home that meets their needs. And I would say that I understand, certainly, budgetary concerns, but I would just ask that we would prioritize what is best for the people of this nation and not balance a budget on the backs of poor people or seniors or homeless people. It is important, and I thank you so very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary. I know you are preparing your first round of YIMBY grants, and I want to make sure of one thing. I just want to make sure that these are grants not for planning, but for the implementation of upzoning and the reduction in whatever regulations are impeding the development of housing generally. When we talked through this program, both verbally but also in the legislative process, I really wanted to avoid pushing out a bunch of money to a bunch of consultants who would tell a bunch of city councils what to do. And I want to be reassured that we're not doing that.
I assure you, Senator, that we're not doing that. We realize that it is important to go directly to these communities and not only to talk with them about the programs, which we have, but to ensure that they do not think they're going to get resources just because they say, we'll look at it. We want to have outcomes that are positive because we can't afford the time to go through a lot of hoops. We need the housing. just quite frankly, we need to talk with people about the issues, not just federal issues, but state and local issues as well, I assure you, sir.
Thank you. And what's your timing for a rollout?
Let's see. Oh, the notice of funding is going to be coming out fairly soon. I don't have the date, but I can get it to you.
Thank you. A lot of states are using Medicaid waivers to support case management and housing-related services. In practice, a lot of homeless service providers are struggling with delays and complications with billings, anything that's Medicaid-related. Having run a nonprofit before that for language translation service and mental health services billed Medicaid, it's a tough business. And I'm wondering what you can do to help these homeless service providers to kind of, get their systems up and running, to have a relatively small homeless service provider shop that is equipped on the fiscal side, on the billing side, to deal with Medicaid is a big challenge. I'm wondering what HUD can do to help everybody.
Well, HUD and HHS have launched a Joint Technical Assistance Center. So what we are doing is talking to communities about how they go around some of the regulations that we think are being restrictive, but as well provide technical assistance as to how they can reach more people. So I think that between Health and Human Services and HUD, we are doing a pretty good job of getting to people to talk to them about how we work together to make sure we can provide the services. Because the one thing that people are finally connecting is that health and housing are very closely tied and related.
Thank you. The budget once again proposes to conduct the continuum of care competition every 2 years instead of annually. How does this help?
Well, it helps because it takes hundreds of hours annually to prepare these proposals. It would be better spent if spending money and time on the people who we serve. And the other thing it does is it gives some consistency. So they're not worried about how they're going to pay their staff from year to year. Maybe they now know, I've got staff for 2 years as opposed to 1. I have resources for 2 years as opposed to 1. And it encourages real confidence in the program. So we think the outcomes will be better.
I think that's right, by the way. I think it's really important that we do that. Having run a nonprofit, if you're on a year-to-year grant, it's hard to hire people because they know, if you're a not-for-profit and you're competing with, the federal government or the private sector in terms of getting a medical director or a psychologist or a psychiatric nurse or whatever it is, and they're looking at this thing thinking it's a maximum, it's probably 30% less pay, but on top of that, it's maximum a year gig, depending on whether we get renewed. It just doesn't work. Final question, I mentioned this in my opener around the specific observations that my staff made. 4 inspections, all from HUD, for 4 different lines of funding from HUD. And I would just like your commitment to work this and to get some sort of standardization. And I'd like to know if there's some statutory problem that we can fix so that we don't have the same agency coming back at a different part of the agency. If it's a matter of federal law, please let us know. If it's not, please fix it.
You have my commitment.
Thank you very much.
What we know is that we do need to standardize some things. That's one of the things we've been working on. I think that you will be pleased by the end of this year as we roll out more of our national standards. But I would suggest that we are required to follow the language in appropriations for different programs. And so I was talking to someone from tribal, we had a meeting with our tribal leaders last week. He says, I understand environmentals, but we don't have a radon problem. Why are you making me test for radon? So those are some things that we are trying to work through.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you very much. Ranking Member Hyde-Smith.
I would be glad to yield my time to Vice Chairman Collins. Are you okay?
Thank you.
Secretary Fudge, as I noted in my opening remarks, the recent storms and tornadoes in Mississippi have had a devastating effect on Rolling Fork, Silver City, Egypt, Amory, across 4 counties and many communities. And we certainly appreciate the President's commitment to the people of Mississippi and the FEMA assistance that is already on the ground to make a difference. And I also appreciate HUD rolling out the program waivers in its disaster response toolbox. That is very appreciated. Although the data on unmet needs is still coming together, it's never too early to think about the longer-term recovery needs of these communities and families. The FY23 omnibus provided $3 billion in additional CDBG-DR funding, of which $162 million remain after taking care of earlier 2022 disasters. Madam Secretary, what are HUD's plans for allocating the $162 million remaining from the FY23 omnibus?
First, let me just say thank you for having a conversation with me about this earlier. I appreciate your time. We do have $162 million remaining, but we have yet to get all of the information and data in from the storms in Florida and from other places. We know this $162 million is not going to go very far. We are generally in the ballpark of $3 to $4 billion for storms for 21 and 22. We don't see that 23 is going to be any different, especially as it has started out the way it has. So the $162 million is more than likely going to go to Selma, to California for the floods, and to Florida. So right now, those funds are allocated, but we will be coming to you for an authorization as soon as we get data in from FEMA.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And I'm a firm believer in the importance of financial literacy education, have been for many, many years when I was in the state legislature. But while it should be taught more in schools, these educational opportunities should be also available to adults as well. And I'm pleased that HUD's budget includes funding for programs like Ross to help public housing residents develop the skills they need to end cycles of dependency, or housing counseling to help families become successful homeowners. However, I am concerned that the request only level funds for Ross and core housing counseling program and misses the opportunity to invest more in expanding financial literacy to more families. While not requesting additional funding, how is the department working to increase the availability of financial literacy education and resources to the individuals and families served through the HUD's program?
Well, on May 1st, we're going to be participating in a summit that addresses family self-sufficiency. It is a program that is very successful throughout our HUD developments, be it public housing and as well multifamily housing. We recently launched a new asset building cohort through our Moving to Work. We have included resources for housing counseling to assist with financing in particular. So I think that we are working very diligently to give those that we serve the opportunity to learn about financing, to save money. We are trying to move people from public housing into homeownership. So we are working very, very diligently to be sure that we prepare people for better financing, better outcomes in their lives.
Thank you. And when it comes to homelessness, we've talked about that a little bit already. A lot of the attention is focused on the large numbers of homeless individuals on the West Coast, and given the numbers, not unreasonably so. But however, with this attention, it is easy to lose sight of the challenges of homelessness faced by other communities, especially in rural areas where there are fewer shelters and supportive services, and where it's easier to undercount the number of homeless individuals. HUD's point-in-time count for 2022 notes that while homelessness increased nationally by 0.3% from 2020 to 2022, in rural areas the increase was 6%. And while urban homelessness is certainly a problem, is the department equally committed to addressing homelessness in the underserved and under-resourced areas of the country as well?
Absolutely. Just this week, we announced a total of $66 million in awards that are specifically targeting homelessness in rural areas. And we had some awards earlier in the year as well. So we are very, very keenly aware of the problem in rural communities, especially because in rural communities you find a great deal of unsheltered homelessness. So we are directing resources to rural communities.
Yeah, I'm seeing more of the encampments in different places, and you know, there definitely is an increase, and my time has expired. Thank you.
Vice Chair Collins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before the clock starts ticking down, I just want to thank you and the ranking member for your leadership on this subcommittee. I care deeply about this subcommittee and the issues that you'll be handling, having been either the chairman or the ranking member for many years. And it's great to know that it's in such good hands with both of you. So thank you. Secretary Fudge, let me begin with a big thank you to you. Last year, I asked you for assistance on behalf of the city of Bangor, where I live, in handling an influx of unsheltered homeless individuals and families. And it led to encampments all over the city. And the city was at a loss as to how to deal with this sudden problem. You sent an expert team to Bangor, which has worked for months with the city. And I want to report to you that just recently, they were able to take down one of the encampments on Valley Avenue in Bangor and find homes for each of the individuals who had been living in the encampment. A tremendous success. And the city officials have been so pleased with the expertise and the suggestions and recommendations that the HUD team brought. So I truly want to thank you for that. More recently, I've discussed with you a request from the city of Portland, which has had a tremendous influx, 1,000 people since January, for example, of unsheltered individuals and families who are asylum seekers who have come to Portland. So they need your help as well. And again, I appreciate your willingness to assist us. One challenge is encouraging private owners and landlords to house these individuals who have been unsheltered. They tend to view, particularly those that are chronically homeless, as challenging tenants. And I encourage them to work with HUD, to work with local officials. But do you have any advice from HUD on how communities, not only in Maine, but across the country, can engage private owners and landlords in this process of providing homes for the unsheltered?
Yes, and thank you so much. Our teams we're really excited about the outcomes and are already talking with Portland.
Great.
So we're already in conversations with their team. We do know that getting landlords involved is a very difficult situation, but one of the things we found is that for certain rental properties, if we give them a master lease, it makes it so much easier for them to work. So that's one of the things we're doing. We're looking at how we can provide toolkits and resources to explain to them why it's a good thing to be involved. We're talking about finding incentives for landlords so that they will lease, especially to homeless. But I think that we all understand it's a problem, but we are working on it. And I think that we're doing really very well, because when we sit down and have conversations with them, then they find that we are a very stable source of resources, that we will assist them beyond just that one rental. So we're working, and it's getting better. It's not where we want it to be, but it is getting better.
Thank you. There are two groups who find themselves homeless that particularly concern me. One are young people who are aging out of foster care. And what I found is that in some states at age 18, you're out of the foster care system. Even if you're still in high school, that assistance is cut off. That breaks my heart. And there are very few youth shelters. There's an excellent one called New Beginnings in Lewiston, Maine, but generally they don't exist. And for someone who's already gone through a difficult situation, a young person, and thus is in foster care, to find themselves at an arbitrary age when they're still in school to no longer have the services of foster care is very sad to me. I led the creation of a youth homelessness demonstration program, And we do have family unification vouchers, and we obviously need to improve the child welfare system. But in the absence of those improvements, I'm concerned that the budget does not provide any funding for these any additional funding for the family unification vouchers. Instead, you're proposing a much larger mandatory program, but no new vouchers for family unification. And my question for you on that is why isn't there funding in the budget for those essential vouchers?
We did just, in March of this year, announce the availability of about $30 million in Foster Youth to Independence program. So that has already been done. We are also, of course, your youth demonstration grant has been awarded to states across the country as well earlier this year. The President's budget does talk about youth vouchers for 2024 in the mandatory, and I think that you're right. I don't disagree with the way that you were suggesting that we might go about it, and it's something that we can talk with them about.
Great. And finally, if you'll indulge me, just a quick, the second segment that I'm really concerned about in our population is we're seeing a growing number of older adults who are unsheltered. The point-in-time survey that HUD does focuses on 3 groups: those under 18, those between 18 and 24, and then above 24, which is a pretty large category. And what I'm hearing is we're seeing people who are homeless who are over age 50, who are even over age 65. And that's a change in the composition of the unsheltered population that really concerns me. So aside from the current point-in-time data, which really doesn't focus on that older group as much, does HUD have available either internally or from other federal or state partners more data so that we can figure out what's going on with that older population and how to meet their needs?
Well, it's estimated, Senator, that in 2020, those that are over 55 years of age made up 17.9% of all the homeless people. And those who are chronically homeless, that 55 and older number makes up 30%. We don't have enough senior housing. We don't have enough housing that is affordable to seniors. And we don't have enough housing in this country where people can age in place. And so with those things, in addition to seniors being on fixed incomes and the rents going sky high, they are being forced and pushed to the street. We are very, very aware of what is going on, but we know the answer is more senior housing, more affordable housing, and taking a look at how in this nation we can allow people to age in place.
Yes.
So it's something. I was at a conference. It's happening in other countries too. I was at a conference in Germany. They're having the same problem. These are the G7 ministers that are talking. Housing is on their agenda as well. Same thing in Asian nations. We're trying to find ways to keep people in their homes.
Great.
But it is acute here at this stage of the game. So I'm glad that you're aware of it, and we can talk about some ideas, but we have some ideas that we'd like to work on.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, great to see you. Always welcome you in Maryland, and thanks for all that you've done for the country and for our state of Maryland. You know well that we're facing an affordable housing crisis in the United States, and I appreciate many of the requests and initiatives in this budget to work to address that, including your request for an increase in housing vouchers. I'm in the process right now of working with Senator Young in reintroducing a bill that we've introduced each year now, each Congress, called the Family Stability and Opportunity Vouchers Act, which is especially focused on providing opportunities for families with young kids to move to areas of greater opportunity. And We appreciate the provisions in your budget that include some of the additional funding for mobility services and the wraparound services that are so important to make that successful. And all the data and all the studies indicate that this can be an effective way for helping families pull themselves out of poverty. So I want to make sure that we focus with you in the department on that going forward. Also appreciate all your efforts when it comes to the choice neighborhood programs. And in Baltimore City, we are continuing to deal with the legacy of systemic racism and segregation. And this program, the Choice Neighborhoods program, I think is an important tool to begin to address that because, as you know, it calls for mixed-use development. And one of the challenges we face as a result of segregation and neighborhoods that have been left behind are things like food deserts, lack of opportunity. And so one of the grants that was recently received was a $10 million grant to something called Perkins Homes, which is a mixed-use project in Baltimore City. Could you just speak briefly to using this program as a tool to try to revitalize neighborhoods?
Choice neighborhood grants are transformational. They can go up to about $35 million. They truly transform neighborhoods and communities. We think it's an outstanding program. We find that communities that have used these resources have made significant changes, not just in the actual fabric of the community based upon new housing, but people feel better about it. People feel good about living in these, most of them end up being mixed use. People very much appreciate it. And what it allows us to do is get away from the whole idea of segregating poverty, which is something that we have done for far too long. So they've been very, very effective. I mean, the competition for them now is just, it keeps us up at night. So many people are looking to get these grants. But they're going very well, very, very well.
Well, thank you for your continued efforts in that area, because we look forward to working with you. It's been very effective in helping certain neighborhoods in Baltimore City. We have a long way to go, make no mistake, but it's a very important tool. As you well know, in addition to making sure we have more affordable housing vouchers, the supply of housing is also a direct factor when it comes to the high costs. We need to increase supply, including supply of middle-income housing. And one of the things I've been hearing about from a number of Maryland constituents is concern about the backlog in the middle-income housing developments that are completing construction. And one of the impediments there has been what they say are delays in receiving information on the approval process for their FHA-insured multifamily loans. We're hearing, heard a little bit about this months ago, hearing more and more about it now. Madam Secretary, if you could just talk to that and assure me that we can work together to address this issue.
I assure you, we did have a backlog for some time. There is no more backlog, so they should be getting information very, very quickly. And if they're not, they should let us know that.
Okay, thank you. We may well be in touch on that, but I appreciate your willingness to quickly work this out. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Secretary, one of the core aspects of the Section 8 voucher program is the public-private partnership between PHAs and landlords. And however, the success of this program, the cornerstone of federal rental assistance, is undercut by both the general shortage of affordable housing that we've talked about, as well as a willingness of private landowners to participate and remain in the program. And the folks that I've talked to in Mississippi, it's not necessarily the tenants, it's the administrative burdens of the voucher program drive the owners and landlords to leave the program. So I know HUD is aware of these challenges while also balancing the need for reasonable oversight of taxpayer dollars, but what update can you provide the committee on the department's effort to streamline programs, regulations, so the landlords will want to stay in this program?
Senator, let me just say, and I'd say it to everyone, we know that we overregulate some programs, and we are working to change it. You know, I come from your side of the table, so for 13 years, I was the one saying, you need to change these things. But now that I'm there, we are doing our very best to change it. We are working with our partners both here in the House and the Senate. We are talking to landlords, we're talking to our people on the ground to figure out what we can do better. We know there are a lot of regulations. I was not aware, Senator Schatz, of the 5 inspections, but we do know that there are situations that we can correct. Some we can do in-house, some require that the Senate or the House take action. And so we are isolating those things that we need to bring to you and say, can you assist us with making these adjustments statutorily? And the things that we can do, we are trying to do as well, because we know it is a problem.
Wonderful. And a substantial number of HUD programs have expired authorizations, as you're well aware of. And the CDBG home and the lead-based paint hazard reduction authorizations expired in 1994. The authorizations for HUD's public housing, housing for the elderly, and Section 8 voucher programs expired in 2003, while homeless assistance grants expired in 2011. While these are only some of the unauthorized programs, they account for 71% of HUD's FY24 request. So what is the administration's plans for working with HUD's authorization committees this year to not just create new programs, but also to modernize its core programs?
Well, I'm not a big fan of creating new programs, I'll just be honest with you. I think we have a lot of them. They are sometimes, because of the way this body operates, we are required to stand up new programs based upon some of the funding we receive, but it's not something that we very much like to do because it takes us a long time to stand up a new program. But we do know that most of our current programs do have at least some underlying statutory authority to operate. We do need to reauthorize some of them, and we're trying to determine which ones in priority we need to reauthorize. But we are clear on the fact that there are some things that we need to do that haven't been done in a very long time.
And discussing the FHA and the Ginnie Mae receipts offsets that funded needed for the annual T-HUD bill, and the budget request, anticipates the declines that we've talked about. But however, the Congressional Budget Office February baseline estimate has these receipts at only $3.3 billion. The estimate was produced prior to HUD's reducing the mortgage insurance premium, which the administration has estimated to reduce receipts by $2.5 billion. But as the actual dollars, the budget request anticipates the offsetting receipts will decline from $10.3 billion in 23 to only $5.5 billion in 24, a reduction of $4.8 billion. So this means the final receipt amount the committee has to use could be roughly $9.5 billion lower this year compared to last year. So given the FHA's premium reduction was largely offset by the Federal Reserve's long-expected rate increase last month, what do we really get for that $2.5 billion cost?
Let me say a couple of things. We were going to be at a loss no matter what we did. Interest rates have made it so that people are not buying homes. People are not refinancing homes. So we were going to have a reduction anyway. What we believed, because in the fund, the mortgage insurance premium fund, is about $142 billion, or I think that's the number, someplace in that ballpark. And so we believe that it was not appropriate to continue to charge persons who are trying to purchase homes with those resources, and we're sitting on that kind of money. It just wasn't right. It just was not the right thing to do. The other thing that it did was it did give some relief in a very high interest environment. It gave some relief to low-income borrowers. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people into homes. But I would say that FHA is doing very, very well. We are solvent to a point where you're asking us to keep 2% above. We're at 11%. Ginnie Mae is doing well. We are doing extremely well, and we continue to fund the federal government at rates that no other agency does. And so we just did not believe that it was the right thing to do to continue to ask poor people and people, first-time home buyers, first-generation home buyers, to continue to bear a burden that they should not bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Schatz, Ranking Member Hyde-Smith. Wonderful to be with you again, Madam Secretary. Thank you for your visit to Delaware and for your attentiveness and engagement around the ongoing challenges we face providing safe, sanitary, affordable, decent housing to the American people. I am frankly thrilled that you are leading this department at this critical time.
Thank you.
As you well know from your years of experience in public service, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which was just referred to by the ranking member, is a significant, robust, and critical tool for the department. Senator Kramer and I have reintroduced our bipartisan bill to expand the supply of housing by partnering with landlords to draw more landlords into the program and to increase the scope. In my own community, where, as you know, I was in county government for a decade, 6 as the county executive, that supply was critical. I'd also be interested in hearing from you what initiatives the department is taking and what we could be doing here to increase supply, because affordability of housing is directly related to supply. And in this challenging interest rate environment, you can, should, and will make critical investments in affordable housing programs, but we also need to do things at the state and local level to increase supply. I'd be interested if you could briefly speak to what initiatives you'd like to see us taking around supply.
There are two things I think that are going to be very, very helpful. One is if we can at least try to meet the president's request for home resources in the 2024 budget, because it would provide us about 15,000 units of affordable housing for new home buyers, another 1,300 units of newly constructed properties, and more than 6,000 units of owner-occupied or rehabilitated properties. But the other thing we have to do is look at all of it in context. So we're looking at how we can either put more resources into the low-income housing tax credit program that Treasury runs. We are looking at how we can better use housing finance agencies to assist with low-cost loans, how we can do more work and put more resources in the Housing Trust Fund. It's a combination of things. But the biggest thing right now is home, because it's the most flexible resource we give to communities.
As you may know, I'm leading the letter here in the Senate, as you for many years did in the House, and look forward to fighting for the home allocation. It was home and CDBG were the two key tools I had as county executive to work with nonprofit affordable housing providers. Monday, I got to be at a ribbon cutting for a new affordable housing multifamily project, small, but in one of our most challenged and burdened neighborhoods. Be Ready, Jesus is Coming Church, Community Development Corporation, the delightful, sadly recently passed away, Pastor Lottie Lee, had this vision that she would take a whole block of dilapidated properties that were nearly falling down and transform them into beautiful state-of-the-art housing. That was possible through the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh, an underappreciated resource, home dollars, CDBG dollars, and frankly, a CDS, an earmark from our congressional delegation. Let me talk, if I could impose on the chairman, for two more things. I do want to make sure that you hear again my enthusiasm. Combating homelessness is a lifelong passion of mine. I worked with the National Coalition for the Homeless when I was a young man. And Delaware has made real progress in combating nearly ending veteran homelessness, but youth homelessness is on the rise. And I was encouraged to see that HUD has a youth homelessness demonstration project. I look forward to working with you to strengthen it and to sustain it, and I hope that we can and will do more to combat youth homelessness in particular. Matt Heckles, your Region 3 Director, and the HUD staff in Delaware are terrific, very engaged, and I hope on your next visit I'll have the opportunity to join you. Reach Riverside, as we have discussed before, is a terrific example of the purpose-built communities model. I believe there's 2 communities in the Cleveland area, Buckeye Woodhill and Glenville, where you've seen that sort of place-based, multi-factor community rebuilding program. I am hopeful that Reach Riverside will get your attention. I continue to work hard. It's one of my top priorities for investment in my community. Last thing I just wanted to mention is that I think the Choice Neighborhoods program is one that could use more resources. I think it has flexibility, I think it has promise, but I think it's under-resourced, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on how Choice Neighborhoods is moving going forward.
Well, I agree with you, quite frankly, that we do need more resources. I mean, I'm looking now at the fact that Wilmington is a finalist in our last round.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're still looking, the program, obviously, the competition is still underway. But I don't know of any community that could not use the resources of a Choice Neighborhood Grant.
Yes.
I mean, certainly we don't have the resources to give them to every community, but they are not only transformational, but they are life-changing. And I think that that's part of what we do. Youth homelessness is a problem that I think people did not realize the gravity of it until the last few years, and it is a major issue in this country. We talked about youth aging out of foster care. They get out of foster care at 18 and they're on the streets. No place to go, no resources. So we have found that the numbers of youth homelessness are just continuing to rise. So we are putting resources in the 2024 budget to deal specifically with youth aging out of foster care.
There is you visited Westside Center, which is building housing specifically for youth aging out of that circumstance, and I think this deserves our attention, and you've got in me an enthusiastic partner to the extent you need any authorizing help or to the extent you need any more support. I know we have very talented chair and ranking of this subcommittee, so you probably don't need my help, but to the extent I can be helpful, I'd love to. Thank you for what you and your very talented team.
Always need your help, Senator.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we always need your help, Senator Coons. Thank you. Ranking Member Hyde-Smith brought up a couple of points that I thought were important. First of all, I just want to agree with her that I understand the idea behind providing some relief on the cost of a mortgage, but I think it's fair to say that whatever relief we provided, sort of blows a hole in our budget and is washed away by the Fed doing what the Fed is doing. And so I just think we ought to be real cautious about that, because I understand it averages out to about $800 worth of savings, which is not trivial. But again, in the interest rate environment in which we're operating, I think what we did was sort of cannibalize our budget and not make enough of an impact for it to be worth it. That's just my view. I also want to talk about CDBG DR. I know that Ranking Member Hyde-Smith is anxious to kind of understand what the remaining unallocated resources, how they're spoken for, how much is available, when money will be coming to her home state to provide the kind of relief that is necessary. And this is exactly the kind of thing that a permanent authorization for DR would solve. And that's why I'm pleased that we're going to introduce another bipartisan bill to get this thing finally done. The difficulty we had with former Senator Toomey is that he didn't like the principle of allowing towns to rebuild after a disaster, because he did not fundamentally think it was a federal responsibility, and he didn't want to authorize a new program. Fair enough. But I think the rest of us, living in the real world, when you have a disaster in your home state or your hometown, you understand we're going to spend this money anyway to provide disaster relief. The question is whether or not we have a permanent authorization to do it in an intelligent, predictable, responsive, accountable way, and that's what a permanent authorization of CDBG DR would do. I'm wondering if you'd comment on that.
Senator, I was in Kentucky last month from the major storms they had in a very, very rural part of Kentucky. We still have people sleeping in tents 7 months after a storm. Because once FEMA goes in, because they've got a permanent authorization, they go in and do their work. By the time we can get there, 6 or 7 months have passed. And people are struggling. It doesn't make sense for us to not be able to go in and help people quickly.
And it doesn't save a penny, and that's the point here. It would be one thing if we're having a conversation about fiscal discipline or whatever it is, but the way to exert fiscal discipline is to have a program and have accountability, not just to spend the money after a bunch of suffering. We're going to spend this money. We might as well do it in as efficient of a way as possible. 2 more quick questions. I understand that FHA multifamily approvals have dropped about 75%. Senator Van Hollen mentioned that. Is that true, and are we fixing this? That seems alarming.
Let me get back to you. I don't know that that's an accurate number, but I'm looking at We'll get back with you on it, because I'm not sure, and I don't want to give you an.
Does that sound wrong to you? I'm looking at your
I
staff.
don't think it is accurate,
I hope it's wrong.
but I don't want to give you a wrong answer.
But if multifamily approvals have dropped at any level, we need to understand why. And also, if we're getting different answers from different people within FHA, we just sort of need to understand exactly what's going on. Finally, homelessness in tribal areas, particularly among young people, is a major concern. And we've pushed HUD to include tribes as eligible recipients for funding for homeless youth. Can you execute on that without a change in federal law?
I do believe we can, yes.
Okay, can you give me an update as quickly as possible on where we are with that? And then the final question is, you said something really important, which is a lot of secretaries will not admit that they overregulate, right? But I think you have the wisdom of having come from the legislative branch and also just understanding that whatever thicket of processes and procedures and rules and laws that you inherited is not your fault. And so you might as well be the turnaround person rather than the defender of the status quo. What I'd like from you, and I'll reduce this to writing, but I don't want to overcomplicate it by listing out all the regulatory barriers, is just a general overview on what key regulatory barriers you see. And what I mean by that is congressional act, internal procedure, rule, anything, right? Anything that is a sort of requirement, whether it's required by federal law or just this is the way we do it, right? And I want you to sort out first by priority, but also by category, so that we know what you're up to, how we can support it, and then what you have identified as a problem that only we can fix. Okay. And I'd like to just sort of project manage this together, so we track the things that need to change within the agency and help you when you're doing rulemaking to consolidate things, or when you're making procedural changes that don't require a new a rule under the Administrative Procedures Act. However it is, I want us to sort this and track it, and I want my staff to have a sort of shared spreadsheet, if you will, so we can work this together, because I don't think this is a partisan question. We just want your agency to work better, and I know you do too.
I welcome it. I really do. And I would also say about tribal nations, the biggest problem we have is infrastructure. When you get into these rural communities, just think about how many reservations and tribal lands we have that have no running water, no plumbing. That should not be in this America. So infrastructure is as big a problem as anything else, because until we can get that infrastructure, we can't put the housing there that we need. I mean, you think about the fact that Native Americans report to the military at higher rates than almost double any other group of people, and we can't house them. It's a problem.
And tens of thousands of Native families with no electricity in the United States of America in 2023. Yeah. Thank you. Chair Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Schatz and Ranking Member Hyde-Smith, and I'm really glad to join both of you today as we continue full steam ahead to return to regular order and pass our funding bills in a timely, bipartisan way. I know that families back in my home state of Washington and across the country are counting on us to work together to get our communities the resources that they need to grow and thrive and compete on the world stage. And when it comes to keeping folks safe, setting families up for success, and strengthening our country, it really starts, as you well know, with making sure that everyone has a roof over their head and no one is left on the streets or out in the cold. Because it's all too common for families in every part of this country to be terrified about what will happen to them or to their kids the moment they can't make rent or cover their mortgage. My home state of Washington, like so many, have been really grappling with our nation's housing and homelessness crisis for years, and it has gotten worse, as you well know, in this pandemic. I've heard from people who have no place to stay, no idea how on earth they're ever going to afford rent or mortgage. I've heard from parents living paycheck to paycheck. They're scared they're going to have to skip meals or medical care to make rent, or who are really frightened their family's going to end up on the street. I've met with a lot of community leaders who are fighting day and night to build more housing, make it more affordable, and connect these folks who are experiencing homelessness with the resources that they need. As I wrote to President Biden, we need a whole-of-government approach here. And let's be clear, whole-of-government includes this subcommittee. That's why I fought to make critical housing investments in our bipartisan funding package last year, and I want to see us build on that progress with funding to tackle the root causes of this crisis. And that means increasing the supply of quality housing and preserving our existing public housing, investing in under-resourced neighborhoods, incentivizing changes to zone laws, rental assistance, assistance for first-time homebuyers. These are investments that pay off for our country in a lot of ways. They help families build wealth. They provide safety and stability so our kids can focus on school and adults can focus on their jobs and strengthen our families and our communities and our economy. So I really do look forward to working with the chair and ranking member on this subcommittee to make sure we have the investments that we need to move ahead. Secretary Fudge, thank you for being here today. I wanted to ask you, House Republicans have now proposed to cut non-defense discretionary programs to fiscal year 2022 levels. Can you talk with us about how those cuts would harm HUD's programs and your department's ability to increase the supply of affordable housing and reduce the cost of housing and people who are experiencing homelessness?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. We do know that if we go to the 2022 levels, we would lose approximately 350,000 vouchers. We would be short well over $1 billion in renewing our project-based rental assistance contracts. That would be a loss of about 87,000 affordable units because we would not be able to meet our contract obligations. We would probably serve about 50,000 plus people who are homeless. We would not be able to serve about 50,000 people who are homeless through our continuums of care programs. And just think about it this way. Things go up. You know, rent goes up. We talked about inflation. Prices go up. If we can't meet at least the inflationary pressures of today, we lose out everywhere. People can't pay their rents because we can't afford to help them pay their rents. So we would have to not only lose all of these things that I just talked about, but we'd probably have a hiring freeze. We'd probably have to lay some people off because we received for the first time in many, many years a raise for some of our staff last year that we would not be able to maintain. It's just, we just can't function the way that we should because we would not have the resources to do it.
Well, I think it's really important that everybody recognize that we have a housing and a homelessness crisis, not only in my state, but across the country. And everyone should understand how serious and devastating those kinds of cuts would be for the entire country. So I just want everybody to absorb that. We have a problem, and we would not be addressing it if we go back to those.
And if I would also say this, that we have for decades and decades neglected public housing. We have not over the last few years been able to give them the kind of resources just to bring some of those properties up so that people can live decent lives. So each year we are putting more resources into that. The President's 2024 budget, I think, requests about $3 billion for capital improvements and $8 billion overall, and it's not enough. We could spend that much money in New York or LA. What about the rest of the country?
So this is a serious challenge for all of us. I do have additional questions. I'll submit them for the record, but Mr. Chairman, as I said, this subcommittee is critical as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Murray. Thank you to all of the members. Secretary Fudge, thanks for coming today to discuss HUD's budget request. The hearing record will remain open until Friday, May 5th, to allow members to submit additional questions for the record, and this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you.